Hey guys, how's it going? Alex Scott here from Consordini.com. Today we are taking a look at the Arturia FX collection, a fantastic bundle of VST effects from the guys at Arturia. We're doing this review for Sonicstate. Now, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more of our Consordini content, you can head to Consordini.com for a ton of great articles, top 10 lists, and then links to our YouTube channel, which you can also find by just searching YouTube for Consordini. We've got all kinds of really cool music-related content. I do tons and tons of studio gear reviews, plugin reviews, all kinds of fun stuff. So hope to see you over there. But in this video, like I said, we are taking a look at the Arturia FX bundle. Now, before I get into it, I do just want to say thank you very much to the guys at Sonicstate, as well as the guys at Arturia for sending me a license to check these plugins out. We used them on some mixing projects, used them on some production projects, and overall, I'm very impressed. So in this video, we're just going to take a look at what all this bundle comes with. I'm going to kind of go through each of the different plugins that are included. We're going to listen to kind of some of my personal favorites that I've really enjoyed using. Now, the Arturia FX collection, it's a very cool bundle because it really comes with a lot. It's kind of interesting how it breaks down. Instead of a lot of other companies where they do bundles of maybe Dynamics plugins or bundles of Reverb plugins or something like that, Arturia has gone for kind of a catch-all approach. They've picked 5 categories of really useful plugins, and they've included 3 plugins for each. So we have 3 compressors, which you can see here. I've got the whole list of everything pulled up in my browser here in Studio One. We have 3 compression plugins. We have a FET76, which is of course a Universal Audio 1176. We have a Comp Tube Stay, which is a Gates stay level. I love that they included this one because there aren't that many plugin emulations out there of the Gates stay level. We also have the VCA65, which is modeled after the old DBX 165, which was essentially just a more flexible version of the DBX 160 with some extra controls. So those are our 3 compressors. We then move into delays. We have the Delay Eternity, which is, I think, kind of an original design of Arturia's. It's an extremely versatile and extremely powerful delay plugin that can actually do quite a bit more than just do delays. It can do all kinds of interesting modulation effects and chorusing and flanging and stuff. Very cool. We then have 2 more kind of old school delay emulations. We have the Memory Brigade, which is modeled after the Memory Man. And then we have the Tape 201, which is, of course, modeled after the legendary Roland Space Echo SE201. And that is my personal favorite of the delay plugins. It really has a lot of fantastic analog tape warble and vibe and distortion to it. So we'll take a listen to that one in a moment here. We have 3 different filter plugins. We have the M12, the Mini, and the SEM. And these are kind of the most interesting plugins to me of the bunch that are included here, because these are standalone filter plugins that are based around the filters present in each of these synthesizers. So the M12 is going to be the Oberheim Matrix 12. It has the full filter section from that synth with a couple of extras thrown in. Filter Mini is based around a lot of Moog kind of step sequencer and filter designs. And then the SEM is, of course, based around the filter on that classic synthesizer. Now, each of these, even though they are all filters from synths implemented as effects plugins, they all kind of do their own thing. You know, the M12 can do lots of very cool, very sweepy kind of envelope filter stuff. The Mini is more geared towards more sequenced kinds of things that are a little bit more discrete. They're all unique in their own way, which I think is very cool. So the next little batch of plugins that we have, a little trio, if you will, are preamp emulations, but they're a little bit more than that. They also have EQs, but these are basically 3 classic preamp/channel strip emulations from 3 classic console or preamp designs. So we have the Pre-1973, which is, of course, the venerable Neve 1073, fantastic sounding pre and EQ, legendary in its own right. We have the Tried A, or Trident A range is what this one is kind of designed to emulate, which is another classic British solid-state console. And then last we have the V76. Now, this one is the most interesting one to me because a lot of people are familiar with old Telefunken preamps, in particular the V72. This was a tube-based preamp. It was designed in the late 50s, early 60s, and is most famous for its use in the red line of recording consoles that were designed and built at Abbey Road and used on a bunch of the early Beatles records, okay? So those were the V72 preamps from Telefunken. Well, the V76 is a bit newer of a design, and by newer I mean later 60s as opposed to the really early ones, and it was a very refined design. Now, not as many people are familiar with this preamp, but it is even cleaner, even more hi-fi, and has not necessarily more character, but just a much smoother character than those original V72s. But again, it's something that there's not a lot of plug-in emulations out there of, and I think it's really, really cool. Now, on its own, a V76 is just a preamp, but they have included a little EQ section here. We're going to take a look at that in a minute so you guys can see a little bit more in terms of that, but very, very cool that they've included that. And then finally, rounding out our little quintet of plugin categories, we have 3 different reverbs. We have Intensity, we have Plate 140, and we have Spring 636. Intensity being another kind of original design from Arturia that's more geared towards special effects reverbs. We have the Plate 140, which is a recreation of the EMT 140 classic plate reverb. We all know it, we all love it. And then the Spring 636 is modeled around a vintage standalone mono spring reverb, although this one will do, so, as I would call it, light stereo as well, which is a nice feature. So that is everything that it comes with. Now what I want to go ahead and do is I've kind of picked my personal favorite from each of these categories, and we're just going to listen to how these things sound, and we're going to do it on drums. So in terms of the compressors, the 76, it sounds great. But what I think is a little bit more unique, the stay level, which sounds great, but also the DBX 165, or in this case, the VCA 65, I don't think I've ever seen a plug-in emulation of this, and it's a compressor that I actually happen to really, really like. I used to have a DBX 163, which is kind of similar in design, which I loved. It was a little half-rack unit. It was a lot of fun, and I've just used all these different 160, both modern and vintage ones over the years, and while I don't own one at the moment, they have always been one of my favorite compressor designs. So I just want to run through a couple of the presets real quick here. Let's first hear the drums dry. Totally unaffected. There's nothing going on with this kit right now. So let's go ahead and pull in dirty drums. There's without. It has so much of that beautiful, smacky, kind of gluey character that the GBX compressors are known for. You know, they're not particularly like warm and boomy. They're more just when you really start to push them, they do exactly that. They get very, very dirty. They have a really nice way of pulling out transients. Now let's hear Lo-Fi Limiter. Just without. And with. So much nice character. I love it. But of course, this is not all just about adding a ton of dirt to something. You know, we can do just some really nice all-around compression. So this is a preset called Density and Aggression for drum bus. Here it is without. And there it is with. So nice. You can hear it's really bringing out some of that interstitial kind of room space in the sound. It's tightening up the transients on the kick and the snare. It's bringing a lot of life to the hi-hat. Very, very, very nice. So that's kind of my personal favorite of the 3 compression plugins. Again, the stay level also sounds really, really great, particularly on vocal. It has an amazing way of just pinning a vocal in place. Very cool. Now, of the delays, the Eternity, I really like. It can do a lot of different stuff and get a little bit wild, and there's a ton of presets. So if you're looking for more special effects delays, that's a great option. But I will always love me the Roland 201. It's absolutely classic, and I love tape delays. So you can hear our default. We pull it up right there. We've got that classic slap back. There's a nice stereo kind of ping-ponging type delay, or with the stereo type delay. And another thing that I love about this plugin is, as you can see, they've really accurately emulated the front panel layout, but they've also given us just a few extras. If we kind of expand the plugin down here, we do have an LFO. We do have kind of some controls for we can add some tape hiss if we would so like. We can kind of mess with the motor in terms of flutter and inertia as they have it labeled here. We have a basic EQ on the input, but again, up here, this is everybody who's ever used or seen a 201 will recognize the different modes for the tape heads. We've got that classic spring reverb in there. If we go over to reverb only mode, you can hear that real classic spring reverb sound. A little basic EQ here for the output of just treble and bass kind of shelving controls. Overall, it's an incredibly accurate representation of 201, but with a lot of the conveniences of a plugin. Obviously in terms of presets, but then also the ability to like sync stuff with the DAW and all that kind of stuff. It's a really great and very authentic sounding plugin. Has a ton of character. Moving on to the filters, these I would say is the little group of plugins that I've probably used the least, although I do really like what this M12 does just in terms of being able to get some very, very cool special effects. So opening it up here, you can see it looks a lot like the Matrix 12. And if you guys have Arturia's V collection, this is pretty much pulled directly from their version of, that Oberheim Matrix 12 or the M12 synth that's in V collection. This is kind of pulled directly out of that and just put as a standalone effects plugin. Now, again, I don't use these a ton, and I'm not like a serious synthesis guy, so really getting in and working with the modulation matrix is not something I'm super hip to or super good at. But what I do like is that it comes with quite a solid selection of really, really good presets, which means that we can kind of dive right in and just get starting some cool sounds right off the bat. A lot of this stuff could be very cool on like breakdowns, or doing like an effects mic or an effects track to bring a little bit of interest or excitement to a drum kit or a drum machine or something. Ratchet Club, that's very, very interesting. Sync operated. You could do some very creative stuff pairing this with a delay. It's a very interesting plugin, and they all are in their own ways. Like I said, this mini kind of more Moog styled one is a little bit more geared towards like gating things and really heavily step sequenced things. So now next we have these three preamps. Of course, everybody loves the Neve, everybody loves the Trident. I also have Softtube does a Trident A-range channel strip that I really, really like. But this Pre V76, like I said, is one of my favorite inclusions here. Looks great. That's another thing I should mention is all of these plugins look fantastic. They've really done the design of the GUI. It really does the original units justice. Another thing that's very, very handy is that we have the ability to resize all of these windows depending on what resolution we're running. I have a monitor that can run either in 1080 or in 4K, and there's a lot of plugins that have a hard time coping with that. They end up being super tiny. Well, with Arturia, with all of their plugins, they have the ability to resize the window right there. Super easy, and a feature that I really appreciate. But again, the V76 here, this one's going to be a little bit more subtle. But we will just push the input gain a little bit here and hear what kind of color this one lends. So we'll start with it bypassed. And then in. Out. It's very, very, very subtle, but you can hear it it fills the sound out a little bit. It gives it this really nice sheen. This EQ also sounds very, very, very nice. So we just have a simple high and low shelving EQ. We have some kind of basic filter options down here. So if we want to do any high pass filtering, we can. We have phase inversion, side to side, left versus right. So if we just give it a little bit of low end, and then a little bit of top end, that we're going to hear the character a little bit more input gain. There's without. again a very subtle plugin, but it's something that just adds a little bit of glow to things. And I'm a big fan of mixing that way. I'm a big fan of working that way. Just adding subtle character, subtle coloration to things. It's one of my favorite things to do in the mix process. And especially if you start doing it over an entire session, you know, like right now I've got this whole session pulled up and we've got drums, percussion, bass, acoustic and electric guitars, piano, organ, background vocals, lead vocals. When you start using effects like this, you know, just on a kick drum or something, you're not going to hear a ton of a difference. But when you start applying it to an entire drum group or to an entire session or to the master bus in your session, suddenly you can start to really emulate a lot of what made these classic records so wonderful. The fact that they were tracked on these big old consoles using these amazing preamps, very, very, very cool, and a very valuable tool in our mixing workflow. So now finally we do have our reverbs. Now I will say, getting into these reverbs, the intensity verb is the only one that let me down a little bit, and that is strictly because of actually the presets that are included. Now, I really appreciate good presets. I don't use presets all the time. You know, definitely not. I definitely go in and tweak stuff to my liking and tweak it to the sound, because no one preset's going to work for everything. But especially with reverb plugins, I find presets to be incredibly helpful in terms of having a starting point, right? So, you know, I love when I open up a reverb plugin, especially one that's designed to be like a modern algorithmic reverb that's trying to get you the sound of different spaces. I really like to be able to go in here and see things like halls, chambers, plates, you know, pretty much anything like that. Obviously, in this case, we have a plate and a spring reverb separately, so maybe not plates, but at least something where it's like a small drum room, and I can kind of start from there. This has a few of those. It has room close up, and that's actually kind of it. Lo-fi room, but that's much more, you know, it seems much more geared towards special effects, but even then there aren't a ton of them. It's also a relatively complex reverb plugin. I mean, we have some of the things that we would expect up here in terms of damping and pre-delay, but then it really goes out into worrying about more special effects type stuff, modulation, envelope followers, this whole function section down here, which you can use to change the nature of the reverb over time. It's another thing that gets synced to the tempo in your DAW. I just kind of wish they had included a little bit more in the way of presets and a little bit more in the way of normal presets, because a lot of this stuff is just very... That's Loop Mangler A. That's Loop Mangler C. Dynamic decay, that's nice, but it's not a very versatile reverb sound. Dynamic fat. It's just none of these are very versatile presets, and I wish that they had included more kind of typical presets, because the few in here, like even if we just stick to the default one, it's a nice sounding reverb. It doesn't sound overly digital. It doesn't sound overly harsh. And I think that if they included some presets that were a little bit more typical, I would actually get a lot more use out of this. It's cool as an effects tool, but I don't often reach for a reverb to get special effects. I'm going to go for a delay. I'm going to go for other modulation-based effects. However, Plate 140, this thing sounds incredible. And on a lot of these, you know, you have some extra options here to drive the input, which is really nice to add some saturation. And again, with the GUI, I just love that, you know, it looks like somebody's written on this with pencil here over the years. You know, it really makes you, it adds a lot of character. And I know it doesn't change the sound at all, but it's a little more inspiring to use that way, you know. Somebody's really taken the time to think about this and make it look like an old funky piece of gear, as opposed to just making it some clean, simple, kind of boring, generic, modern looking thing. So this is the Plate 140. Again, you can add that drive, that saturation. We have 3 different models of plates. A modern plate, a classic EMT plate, and a punchy plate. I prefer the classic one all the way. And then we do have a decay time knob here, so if we want to go crazy and just leave the plate wide open, very, very cool. There's stereo width control where we can go from mono all the way out to super wide stereo. And then we do have a wet dry blend in case we want to use it on a send or something like that, or use it on an individual channel. Okay, guys, so there you go. There is a good, solid overview. I think they've picked some very cool and very unique and very interesting things to include in here. Would I like to see a few more compressors? Maybe, yeah. I don't feel like they've included the most versatile list of compressors here. They're all, I mean, you know, they cover a few decent grounds, but like an optical compressor would be really nice to have in this bunch. In terms of everything else, though, I think it's very, very solid. I think that everything sounds really, really good, and everything is set up very well and very easy to use, with maybe with the exception of this intensity reverb. But again, that's just more a thing of personal taste. Other than that, it all sounds great. There's a ton here for anybody getting started with mixing, or particularly production, since this is overall a little bit more geared towards really effects stuff. I think it's an excellent bundle to consider picking up. I think it's a great complement to the V collection because a lot of these things are going to play really, really, really nicely. You know, we think about classic tape and analog delays and filters and plate reverbs and stuff like this. These are all things that we love to reach for when we're looking to make our plug-in synths sound that much grittier, that much more classic, you know, these classic preamps and stuff. It's a great pairing to introduce, you know, the V collection has introduced a lot of people to classic analog synths in plug-in form, and I think this V collection is a great kind of first step into the world of classic vintage effects modeling, and they play really, really nicely together. So overall, I'm very impressed. I love it. Thank you again so much to Sonicstate and Arturia for hooking me up with the licenses for these. I've had a great time checking them out. I definitely am finding them useful in my workflow, and hopefully you guys will too if you decide to check them out. But again, my name is Alex Scott with Consordini.com, here reviewing for Sonicstate. Thank you so very much for watching. Head over and check out Consordini.com if you want to see any more of our content, and we'll see you in the next video.